In a world filled with questions, where wisdom knows no boundaries, join us on a journey of enlightenment and endless learning. Eternal Teachings. TV. Discover the eternal.
In this analytical video, we explore Britain's rapid decline from a once mighty empire to a struggling nation. This perspective is strictly anti-Western, examining a range of historical, economic, and social factors. We delve into Britain's imperial history, its post-World War II decline, decolonization, economic mismanagement, social inequalities, and the impact of recent political decisions. The history of Britain's rise and fall as a global superpower is a compelling narrative filled with exploitation, greed, and eventual economic and social downfall. Once heralded as the empire on which the sun never sets, Britain now faces a stark reality of economic downturn, social inequality, and political instability. This analysis delves into the factors behind Britain's decline, exploring its imperial history, the aftermath of decolonization, economic mismanagement, social inequalities, and the recent political decisions that have further exacerbated its troubles. From an anti-Western perspective, this narrative highlights the negative consequences of Britain's past actions and current policies. The British Empire. Rise and fall. At its height, the British Empire was the largest empire in history, controlling vast territories across the globe. This dominance was built on the ruthless exploitation of resources, people, and markets. The empire's wealth was derived from the subjugation and exploitation of colonies, which provided raw materials and a market for British manufactured goods. This economic model was unsustainable and led to significant moral and economic costs. The colonies suffered immensely under British rule. Local industries were destroyed to make way for British goods, leading to widespread poverty and underdevelopment. The cultural and social fabric of colonized societies was irreparably damaged. Furthermore, the economic benefits of imperialism were not evenly distributed within Britain itself, leading to stark social inequalities. The moral bankruptcy of the empire was evident in its brutal suppression of dissent and resistance in the colonies. The use of force to maintain control and the exploitation of colonized peoples created deep-seated resentment and resistance, which ultimately contributed to the empire's downfall. Post-World War II. Decline. The Second World War marked a turning point in Britain's history. The war effort drained Britain's financial resources, leaving it heavily indebted and reliant on American aid through the Marshall Plan. This dependence on the United States marked the beginning of Britain's decline as a global superpower. In the immediate post-war period, Britain faced significant economic challenges. The war had devastated its industrial base, and the process of rebuilding was slow and fraught with difficulties. Deindustrialization began to take hold as traditional industries, such as coal mining and steel production, faced stiff competition from more efficient producers in other countries. The economic policies of successive British governments failed to address these challenges effectively. Instead of investing in modernizing its industrial base, Britain chose to focus on maintaining its global influence through military and political means, further straining its limited resources. Decolonization and its aftermath. The wave of decolonization that swept through the world in the post-war period dealt a severe blow to Britain's global standing. The loss of colonies meant the loss of valuable economic resources and markets. This shift significantly impacted Britain's economy, which had become heavily reliant on the wealth generated from its colonies. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was a clear indication of Britain's reduced global influence. The crisis exposed Britain's inability to act independently of American interests and marked the end of its role as a dominant global power. The humiliation of the Suez Crisis was a turning point, forcing Britain to confront its diminished status on the world stage. The economic implications of decolonization were profound. The loss of colonies led to a decline in trade and investment. exacerbating the economic difficulties already facing Britain. Additionally, the influx of immigrants from former colonies added to social tensions and inequalities within Britain. Economic mismanagement by successive British governments further contributed to the country's decline. The policies of the 1960s and 1970s failed to address the structural problems facing the economy. Instead of investing in new industries and technologies, Britain continued to rely on its outdated industrial base. The rise of neoliberalism in the 1980s, championed by Margaret Thatcher, marked a significant shift in economic policy. Thatcher's policies of deregulation, privatization, and austerity were intended to revitalize the economy, but they had the opposite effect. Deindustrialization accelerated, leading to widespread unemployment and regional disparities. The impact of these policies was particularly severe in the industrial heartlands of the North and Midlands. Traditional industries were decimated, and communities that had been built around these industries were left to deal with the social and economic fallout. The erosion of the welfare state and the introduction of austerity measures further exacerbated social inequalities and poverty. The rise in social inequalities in Britain over the past few decades has been stark. The gap between the rich and the poor has widened significantly, with wealth and opportunities increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small elite. The erosion of the welfare state and public services has had a devastating impact on the most vulnerable sections of society. Austerity measures introduced in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis have led to cuts in public spending on healthcare, education, and social services. These cuts have disproportionately affected the poor and marginalized, leading to a rise in poverty and social exclusion. Food banks have become a lifeline for many families, and homelessness has increased dramatically. The social fabric of Britain has been further strained by the rise of xenophobia and racism. Immigrants and ethnic minorities have been scapegoated for the country's economic problems, leading to increased social tensions and divisions. The hostile environment policy introduced by the government has created a climate of fear and uncertainty for many immigrants and asylum seekers. Brexit has been a defining moment in Britain's recent history, marking a significant shift in its political and economic landscape. The decision to leave the European Union was driven by a combination of nationalism, xenophobia, and economic discontent. The political and economic chaos that has ensued has further exacerbated Britain's decline. The economic consequences of Brexit have been severe. The uncertainty surrounding the UK's future relationship with the EU has led to a decline in investment and a slowdown in economic growth. The loss of access to the single market has made it more difficult for British businesses to trade with Europe, leading to job losses and economic stagnation. The social divisions exposed by Brexit have deepened existing inequalities. The rhetoric of the Leave campaign, which blamed immigrants for the country's economic problems, has fueled xenophobia and racism. The political fallout from Brexit has led to a fragmentation of the political landscape, making it difficult for any government to address the country's pressing economic and social issues effectively. Britain's current economic crisis is characterized by high inflation, stagnation, and increasing debt. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these issues, exposing the vulnerabilities of the British economy. The government's response to the pandemic, characterized by mismanagement and incompetence, has further deepened the crisis. The economic impact of the pandemic has been uneven, with the most vulnerable sections of society bearing the brunt. Job losses and cuts in public spending have led to an increase in poverty and social exclusion. The healthcare system, already strained by years of austerity, has struggled to cope with the demands of the pandemic. Comparisons with third world countries are becoming increasingly apt as Britain grapples with these challenges. Economic metrics such as GDP growth, unemployment, and public debt paint a grim picture of the country's economic health. Social indicators such as life expectancy, child poverty, and educational attainment further highlight the extent of Britain's decline. The narrative of Britain's decline from an empire to a struggling nation is a cautionary tale of the consequences of imperialism, economic mismanagement, and social inequality. The moral and economic costs of the British Empire, the impact of decolonization, and the failures of successive governments have all contributed to this decline. The recent political and economic failures have only exacerbated the situation. This analysis, strictly from an anti-Western perspective, emphasizes the negative repercussions of Britain's historical and contemporary actions on both itself and the broader world. The British Empire's legacy of exploitation and oppression left a lasting impact on its former colonies, creating a ripple effect that has hindered global progress and development. Britain's economic policies post-decolonization did not just affect the colonies, but also led to significant internal strife. The focus on maintaining global dominance, rather than addressing domestic economic issues, set the stage for long-term decline. The legacy of exploitation. The economic foundations of the British Empire were built on the exploitation of colonized peoples and their resources. This exploitation led to underdevelopment in the colonies, which struggled to build sustainable economies post-independence. The extraction of resources without fair compensation or reinvestment created economies that were dependent on a single commodity or a few industries, making them vulnerable to market fluctuations. In Britain, the wealth generated from the colonies was not evenly distributed. The upper echelons of society benefited significantly, while the working class saw little improvement in their living standards. This created a deep socio-economic divide that persists to this day. The decline of industries that had been bolstered by colonial exploitation left many regions in Britain economically devastated. Economic policies and mismanagement. The economic policies of the mid-20th century failed to adapt to the changing global landscape. Britain's insistence on maintaining an outdated industrial base rather than investing in new technologies and industries put it at a competitive disadvantage. The economic decline was exacerbated by poor policy decisions, such as austerity measures and privatization initiatives that did little to foster long-term growth. The neoliberal policies of the Thatcher era, while intended to revitalize the economy, primarily benefited the wealthy and widened the socio-economic gap. Privatization led to the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, while deregulation resulted in economic volatility and crises. The emphasis on free market policies without adequate social safety nets led to increased poverty and inequality. Social inequalities and rising poverty. Britain's economic policies have contributed to a significant rise in social inequalities and poverty. The dismantling of the welfare state and cuts to public services have had a devastating impact on the most vulnerable sections of society. Austerity measures and public services. The austerity measures implemented in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis were aimed at reducing public debt but had severe social consequences. Cuts to healthcare, education, and social services disproportionately affected low-income families and marginalized communities. These cuts led to a deterioration in the quality of public services, exacerbating social inequalities. Healthcare services, particularly the National Health Service, or NHS, have been underfunded and overstretched, leading to longer wait times and reduced access to care. Educational institutions have faced budget cuts, impacting the quality of education and widening the gap between rich and poor students. Social services, including housing and welfare support, have been scaled back, leading to an increase in homelessness and food insecurity. The impact of unemployment and regional disparities. Deindustrialization and the decline of traditional industries have led to high levels of unemployment in many regions, particularly in the North and the Midlands. These areas, once economic powerhouses, have faced significant economic and social challenges. The lack of investment in these regions has led to a cycle of poverty and deprivation. Unemployment and underemployment have had a profound impact on communities. The loss of stable, well-paying jobs has led to increased reliance on precarious, low-wage employment. This has resulted in a decline in living standards and an increase in poverty. The regional disparities in economic opportunities have also fueled social tensions and divisions. Brexit, political and economic turmoil. Brexit has been a significant turning point in Britain's recent history, leading to political and economic turmoil. The decision to leave the European Union was driven by nationalist and xenophobic sentiments, and its aftermath has highlighted deep divisions within British society. Economic consequences of Brexit. The economic consequences of Brexit have been severe and far-reaching. The uncertainty surrounding the UK's future relationship with the EU has led to a decline in investment and a slowdown in economic growth. Businesses have faced increased costs and regulatory burdens, making it more difficult to compete in international markets. The loss of access to the single market has been particularly detrimental to industries that rely on cross-border trade. Manufacturing, agriculture, and services sectors have all been negatively impacted, leading to job losses and economic stagnation. The decline in economic activity has also reduced tax revenues, putting further strain on public finances. Social and political divisions. Brexit has exposed and deepened social and political divisions within Britain. The rhetoric of the Leave campaign, which blamed immigrants for the country's economic problems, has fueled xenophobia and racism. This has led to an increase in hate crimes and social tensions. The political landscape has also been fragmented by Brexit. The major political parties have struggled to navigate the complexities of the Brexit process, leading to a lack of coherent leadership and policy direction. This has made it difficult to address the country's pressing economic and social issues effectively. Current economic crisis: inflation, debt, and stagnation. Britain's current economic crisis is characterized by high inflation, rising debt, and economic stagnation. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these issues, exposing the vulnerabilities of the British economy. Inflation and rising costs. High inflation has eroded purchasing power and increased the cost of living for ordinary Britons. Essential goods and services have become more expensive, putting additional pressure on households already struggling to make ends meet. The government's response to inflation has been inadequate, failing to address the root causes and provide meaningful relief. Public debt and fiscal challenges. Rising public debt has limited the government's ability to invest in economic recovery and public services. The pandemic has led to increased borrowing to support businesses and individuals, but this has also increased the fiscal burden. The government's focus on austerity and deficit reduction has further constrained its ability to address economic challenges, economic stagnation, and lack of growth. The British economy has been stagnant, with low levels of growth and productivity. This stagnation has been driven by a lack of investment in innovation and infrastructure, as well as the uncertainty created by Brexit. The failure to develop a coherent economic strategy has left Britain lagging behind other developed countries. Comparisons with third world countries. The economic and social challenges facing Britain have led to comparisons with third world countries. Indicators such as GDP growth, unemployment, public debt, and social inequality highlight the extent of Britain's decline. Economic indicators. Economic indicators paint a grim picture of Britain's economic health. Low GDP growth, high unemployment, and rising public debt are all signs of a struggling economy. These indicators are more commonly associated with developing countries, highlighting the extent of Britain's decline. Social indicators. Social indicators such as life expectancy, child poverty, and educational attainment further highlight the extent of Britain's decline. Life expectancy has stagnated, and in some areas, it has even declined. Child poverty has increased, with many families relying on food banks and other forms of support. Educational attainment has been impacted by cuts to funding and resources, leading to a decline in the quality of education. Broader implications of Britain's decline. The decline of Britain has broader implications for the global order. Britain's reduced global influence has impacted its ability to shape international policies and maintain its status as a major global power. This decline also reflects broader trends in the decline of Western dominance and the rise of new global powers. Impact on international relations. Britain's decline has impacted its ability to influence international relations and maintain its status as a global power. The loss of colonies and reduced economic strength have limited its ability to project power globally. This has led to a shift in the global balance of power, with emerging economies such as China and India playing a more prominent role. Reflection of Western decline. The decline of Britain is part of a broader trend of the decline of Western dominance. The economic and social challenges facing Britain are mirrored in other Western countries, highlighting the limitations of the neoliberal economic model. This decline reflects the shifting dynamics of global power and the rise of new economic and political centers. Conclusion. The narrative of Britain's decline from an empire to a struggling nation is a complex and multifaceted one. It is a story of exploitation, economic mismanagement, social inequality, and political turmoil. From an anti-Western perspective, this narrative highlights the negative consequences of Britain's historical and contemporary actions on both itself and the broader world. The legacy of the British Empire, the economic policies of successive governments, and the social inequalities that have arisen as a result have all contributed to Britain's decline. The recent political and economic challenges, particularly Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic, have further exacerbated these issues. As Britain grapples with these challenges, it must confront the realities of its past and present and work towards a more equitable and sustainable future. This analysis serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of imperialism, economic mismanagement, and social inequality. It underscores the importance of addressing the root causes of these issues and working towards a more just and equitable society. The decline of Britain is a reflection of broader global trends, highlighting the need for a new approach to economic and social policies that prioritize the well-being of all people rather than the interests of a select few.